But yeah, I guess that brings us to our bubble case of the week.
Yes.
This is our third to last bubble case of the week before there's actually, there's actually a result to where these bubble cases end up.
None of
And
them end up in the Hall of Fame this year, I'll tell you that.
Billy Wagner, this is one of the more interesting cases we have. We've talked about mostly position players. We've talked about two starting pitchers, and one of them would be in, without the internet, I guess.
Yes.
And this is a relief pitcher, and relief pitchers are odd because like they definitely don't have the production, and wins above replacement does not benefit them at all. But we agree that closers definitely have a
They have a
distinct.
steeper hill to climb.
Yeah, they have a steeper hill to climb, and like, wins above replacement doesn't necessarily appropriately value their role on a team in
That's
terms
correct.
of, a guy that comes in the ninth inning and secures the victory for you. And Billy Wagner was one of the best to do it in the ninth inning,
Yeah.
and he was, he joins kind of a more modern look at the closer. I think a lot of relief pitchers in the Hall of Fame already, like, Dennis Eckersley, Goose Gossage, Hoyt Wilhelm,
Hmm.
Raleigh Fingers. Those were guys who would consistently get like 6-7 out saves, and their save percentages would plummet due, or not necessarily plummet, but it would be significantly lower because of that. And maybe they weren't looked at to be as dominant. Billy Wagner, Mariano Rivera, Trevor Hoffman were guys that were mostly put in to get the final three outs, and that was that.
Yeah. So can I say something real quick about Eckersley?
Uh, yes,
So he was obviously a starter for a lot of his career, and he became basically a full-time reliever slash closer the very year that he came to Oakland in 1987. And from 1987 on, he had a 136 ERA plus, 296 ERA, and also 774 strikeouts and 789 and two-thirds innings pitched. So just under, um, 9 strikeouts per nine, 7.7 hits per nine, and pretty good um, ERA with all things considered for that era.
yeah, yeah. Eckersley is a pretty interesting case. I think most of his innings were from being a starter, and most of
Yeah.
his appearances were as a reliever.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, pretty interesting. But yeah, Billy Wagner, we'll talk about where he is at in terms of the Hall of Fame votes and all that. He's in his sixth ballot. He started at 10.5% in 2016, which was his first ballot. And he kind of stayed there until last year. He received a 15% increase from 2019 to 2020, where he went from 16.7% to 31.7%. And currently, as it stands now, has 51.5% of the vote out of 130 known ballots. And he's been one of the guys who's netted some of the most out of
Yeah. The
everyone in
three the
the
three guys
WRC.
with the three guys that have had big gains this year are three guys that we've talked about. Billy Wagner, of course, right now, and then previous bubble cases like Scott Rowland and Todd Helton. Those have been the three biggest gains this year, and it's certainly looking real up for these guys that someday they could get in.
Yes. Yeah, we've noticed it's been a very large increase. Scott Rowland, I think, is at 68% currently.
He could probably
Uh,
get in next year.
yeah, it's very, very possible. I guess, I wonder what changed in the writers' minds. Maybe they went more into the sabermetrics. I don't know. We'll see.
Possibly. I read one guy's column who added Roland today, and he literally said, like, after taking further examination, I've noticed that Scott Rowland, like, on an offensive and defensive side of the ball, analytically did live up to that hype and did would fit well with his Hall of Fame peers. So
Yeah.
yeah, that is definitely part of it.
Yeah, it must be. It must be. And like, I didn't really, I didn't put him on the ballot last year, and I've recognized that more this year. But yeah,
But you didn't know as much last year. Like
yeah.
this is last year was kind of an introduction to the Hall of Fame for you. This year I'm giving you the full perspective.
Yeah, and like I was sort of weird about it because I was like I didn't want to be someone that was like, all right, he has a high WAR, so he's automatically in
Yeah.
the Hall of Fame, sort of. Like I didn't want to just look at his wins above replacement and determine he was
It is weird that War particularly gets a lot of hate because it's kind of like the leader of the pack as far as like advanced analytics that have been taking over the game over the last 10 years. Like whenever someone cites how much they hate analytics, it's like, oh, these guys with their War, like that's always the first one. And it's interesting because that's kind of the one that tells the whole story better than anything else.
yeah, I mean, it's the only thing really that applies both offense and defense.
Yeah. And as a pitcher, it's like, pitching ability, strikeout ability, peripheral ability, stuff like that.
Production,
Yeah.
with innings and all that. A guy, you see a guy with 250 innings and the same ERA as a guy with 200 innings. 250 inning guy is going to get rewarded for that. But yeah, uh, WAR is definitely, and as we transition into Billy Wagner, WAR is weird with pitchers. Billy Wagner had 27.7 B WAR and 24.0 F WAR, and the average Hall of Fame reliever B WAR is 39.1. But if you take out Dennis Eckersley, who had 361 starts, the average Hall of Fame reliever B WAR is 35.8. So Wagner would be about 8 under that marker. And Wagner has 19.8 peak WAR, best 7 seasons of WAR combined. And that is 6.2 below the average Hall of Fame reliever, and it is 4.5 below average if you take out Eckersley in that comparison. And also on the surface, you can see Billy Wagner 2.31 career ERA, 2.73 career FIP, and 187 ERA plus in 903.0 innings pitched. He also has 422 saves, which is sixth all time. And in the postseason, he did not necessarily help his case, but it's something to go over in the on the surface stats. 10.03 ERA in just 11 and 2/3 innings pitched in the postseason. And in terms of, looking on the surface in terms of what you see on the standard stat sheet, very comparable to relievers of today's game, like Craig Kimbrell, Aroldis Chapman, and Kenley Jansen. Wagner was kind of the original archetype of that reliever, a guy who can get a lot of strikeouts, strike his way out of situations, and prevent hits a lot was his big thing for sure.
Yeah.
And like even with walks, I think he still had a better than average walk rate too.
Three walks per nine. Yeah.
Yeah, that's better than average because I think your average pitcher has like 3.5 walks per nine or something like that.
That's
But
right.
what do we see on the surface from Billy Wagner?
So I made sure to add in that last bit because usually when we do the on the surface stats, we compare them to other players with similar career numbers. That doesn't really exist with Billy Wagner because all the guys that you can compare him to the most are still playing. So that leads me to believe and to evidently say that he was ahead of his time. He was Craig Kimbrell before there was a Craig Kimbrell. He was Aroldis Chapman before there was Aroldis Chapman. He was Kenley Jansen before there was a Kenley Jansen. And those guys, they were our three, easy picks, even though we only had to pick two for relievers of the decade when we did that show last year, right?
Yeah,
So Billy Wagner was a guy that sort of almost paved the way for guys like that because of the way he was able to perform. He made it, if you want an idea of what Craig Kimbrell or Aroldis Chapman or Kenley Jansen's careers would look like, on a more lengthy scale, you're looking at Billy Wagner's career. And the fact that nobody else was able to do it at his time leads me to believe that he's a Hall of Famer.
Yeah, and we'll get into comparisons. And usually with comparisons, I look at like certain range of WAR, certain range of innings, but we're not going to do that because there's only 8 Hall of Fame relievers. So we'll just take a look at how he compares to some of those Hall of Fame relievers, just in general. See where he lines up. So the first comparison, basically just a number comparison. Uh, Billy Wagner versus Bruce Sutter, who's a Hall of Fame reliever, pitched in mostly the 70s and 80s. Wagner and Bruce Sutter, Hall of Fame reliever, by the way. So that's what we're comparing. Best of the best. Wagner had a higher B WAR, 27.7 to 24.0. Sutter had the higher peak WAR. Sutter actually, ironically enough, had a better peak WAR than actual total wins above replacement. Oddly enough, as he had some negative seasons as well in a pretty short career. But Sutter wins the battle in terms of peak WAR, had 24.3 peak WAR. Wagner had 19.8. Sutter slightly has the edge in terms of JAWS, 24.2 to 23.7. But Wagner, in terms of run prevention, especially compared to his era, has a big advantage. 187 ERA plus and 903 innings pitched. Sutter had a 136 ERA plus and 1,042 innings pitched, and not a huge innings advantage there. So I guess Wagner definitely has the advantage there. But you can see very comparable to a Hall of Fame type reliever. And the second comparison to look at, Billy Wagner versus Lee Smith, who was elected in the
Veterans era in 2018.
Veterans era.
It was the Today's Game Era Committee in 2018. I'm sorry.
Yeah, he got elected along with
we don't need to talk about that.
Yeah.
We're not going to talk about that. That was the worst thing that ever happened.
But yeah, Lee Smith, he was the all-time saves leader before Trevor Hoffman.
Yeah.
If you've heard of him before. And it is funny, like there were Hall of Fame elections while he still had the saves record, and he still was barely breaking 50%. Back to Billy Wagner and Lee Smith, how they compare against each other. Billy Wagner, or Lee Smith, wins the B WAR battle. He had 28.9. Wagner had 27.7. He also beats him in the peak WAR. He had one more win above replacement in terms of peak WAR than Billy Wagner did. Smith had 24.8 JAWS. Wagner had 23.7, but Wagner was superior in terms of run prevention by a lot. 187 ERA plus in 903 innings, as mentioned before. Smith 132 ERA plus in almost 400 more innings, 1,289 and a third innings pitched. And yeah, had more saves and that nature. But I guess the biggest comparison you can make in terms of Hall of Fame relievers versus Billy Wagner is Trevor Hoffman, because they played in the exact same era. Yeah. All the numbers are very, very comparable. And, they basically had the same exact role. That's the best comparison you can make in terms of Billy Wagner versus other Hall of Fame relievers. So Hoffman had 0.3 more B WAR than Billy Wagner did.
But he also played much longer.
Yeah, he did play a good amount longer than Billy Wagner.
And we're talking about WAR per 162. Billy Wagner comes out on top there.
In fact, Billy Wagner had a superior peak WAR to Trevor Hoffman. It was 19.8 to 19.4. And they have the exact same JAWS. So Billy Wagner, very, very comparable in terms of wins above replacement to Trevor Hoffman. And in terms of run prevention, Wagner's superior again, 187 ERA plus versus Hoffman's 141. Hoffman had close to 200 more innings pitched than Billy Wagner. So if you can take that into account in terms of production. Also, Wagner had a 558 OPS against. Hoffman's was up to 609. And Hoffman did beat him in save percentage with 88.8%. Wagner had 85.9%, but so, still pretty comparable. And Wagner beats him in strikeouts despite having almost 200 less innings pitched, 1,196 strikeouts to Hoffman's 1,133 if you're big into strikeouts. So what do we see from the comparisons? I see a lot of similarities here.
Yeah, and that's what I'm going for here. Is like if you put Billy Wagner up with the average Hall of Fame reliever, he hangs.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's more of a debate of whether like how much you value relievers and whether you think those guys deserve to be
Well,
in the Hall of Fame.
everyone who's voted in the Baseball Hall of Fame for the last 3 years has voted for a reliever at some point.
Yes,
So
that is true. That
they're
is
not
true.
completely off the table.
Yes, that is true. So now we get into the case against and for Billy Wagner. We'll start with the case against. Just generally speaking, putting in relievers can be weird as they don't accumulate many innings or production compared to starters. Billy Wagner had like 900 innings pitched. Kurt Schilling, who we're talking about, had 30 over 3,200, and Mark Burley had uh, over 3,000 innings pitched as well. So it's in terms of production, it can be interesting how relievers are looked at. Although the argument against that is they're put in the most crucial of situations. And in fact, if elected, Billy Wagner would have the least amount of innings of anyone going into the Hall of Fame as a pitcher, and the pitcher with the next fewest innings would still have 15% more innings than Billy Wagner did. So he did not produce that many innings. So I guess that's sort of why his wins above replacement is a little lower, even with his very good run prevention. The case against him also could be below average B WAR, below average peak WAR, and below average JAWS for a Hall of Fame reliever. JAWS, by the way, is the average between your total
JJ.
wins above replacement and your peak wins above replacement. That is what JAWS is. So it takes into account both longevity and your dominance in your era, if that was not made aware. And although he is comparable to Trevor Hoffman, Wagner's win probability added, which is a bigger stat for relievers. It benefits relievers a lot. Like I think Mariano Rivera is 5th or 6th all time, and I guess he did play for great teams, so his win probability added would be higher. But Wagner's win probability added is closer to Jonathan Papelbon and Francisco Rodriguez than it is to Trevor Hoffman. And another case, I guess, with Billy Wagner's number of saves is there are players ahead of him in the saves leaderboard that are not in the Hall of Fame. And also in terms of saves, Wagner only finished top 5 in saves 4 times. If you want to compare him to the other Hall of Fame relievers, Hoffman finished top 5 in saves 10 times compared to 4 times. And Lee Smith finished top 5 11 times. And the last thing you could have against Billy Wagner is that 10.03 playoff ERA kind of puts a little dent in his resume, especially when the importance of relievers is increased more than anyone in the playoffs. So that's the case against Billy Wagner being a Hall of Famer. But now we'll get into the case of why he may be a Hall of Famer.
Yeah. So you mentioned the lack of innings pitched, and I do, obviously he only got 900 innings, which isn't a ton on a Hall of Fame standpoint, but he made all 900 of those innings count. He is the strikeouts per nine all-time leader, minimum 670 innings pitched. And that's not necessarily a cherry pick because that's still 233 innings below the amount that he pitched. So if you were to, take someone who pitched exactly that many innings less than Billy Wagner in baseball history, they don't have more strikeouts per nine. His 11.9 still reigns at the top. He also had 12 seasons with 45 innings pitched and 10 Ks per nine. He had no other. Okay, so he has 12 of those such seasons, and when he retired, no other reliever in baseball history had more than 8, and currently no other reliever has more than 9. So his 12 seasons with 45 innings pitched and 10 strikeouts per nine at least are the most by any reliever in baseball history. Also, if we're talking about Mariano Rivera here, the greatest closer of all time, the only unanimous Hall of Famer, if he came out of retirement, faced exactly 782 batters, and he struck out every single one of them, Billy Wagner would still have a higher strikeout percentage than Mariano Rivera career-wise. Just to put in perspective how good he was, he struck out over a third of the batters he faced with a 33.2 strikeout percentage for his career. He is also the only pitcher in the live ball era, that is since 1920, with 700 plus innings pitched and a whip below 1. That is walks plus hits divided by innings pitched. He pitched more innings than he allowed base runners in his career, and no one else has done that with at least 700 innings pitched in the last 100 years. He also has 6 seasons with 190 ERA plus, and 10 plus strikeouts per nine. That is the most in baseball history, and no other reliever has ever had more than 3 of such seasons. He has 6. He's double the next best among relievers. He is also the only pitcher in baseball history with 400 innings pitched and 6 or less hits per nine allowed. That would be 5.99 hits allowed exactly. Also, Billy Wagner, Mariano Rivera, and Hall of Famer Hoyt Wilhelm are the only pitchers in the live ball era to have at least 13 seasons with 40-plus innings pitched and an ERA below 3. He had great run prevention pretty much every year as a reliever. And from 1999 to 2006, which is right around where his peak was, he had the second best reliever F4 in the majors, of course, behind Mariano Rivera. And he was only 4 wins behind him, so it wasn't like it was complete, blown out of the water. And lastly, his 11 seasons with 60 or more strikeouts and 30 or less walks are the most in baseball history. So that is Billy Wagner's Hall of Fame case. Not only do I think he's a Hall of Famer, but I think there's a fair case to be made that he's the second best reliever of all time.
There is a case to be made. Yeah, like a 187 ERA plus is
absurd.
Very, very, very notable.
Yes.
For sure. And yeah, like behind Rivera, it's kind of a race for second. And yeah, Billy Wagner could definitely win that race there. But yeah, that's Billy Wagner.